Welcome back to 46 Widowed Life, Love, and Family. I'm your host, Mr. Paul. Happy 4th of July, everyone. Hope you're enjoying your time off or had enjoyed your time depending on when you're listening to this episode. I want to thank everyone that left comments after the last episode and thank those that took part in the poll. Also, those that have subscribed or started to follow the podcast on the different podcast sources that I use. This month's episode is a special one because it pertains to Debbie and my son JoJo. Of course, that is his nickname given to him by Debbie, so I'll be referring to him as such throughout this episode. I believe in previous episodes when I've spoken about him, he has always been a blessing that came to us at a very important time in our lives. It was mine and Debbie's last big adventure together, and it eventually completed our family. However, this journey took several years and quite a bit of heartache before we were even blessed with him. As most marriages, are never perfect. And much of our marriage life, too, we had our ups and downs. We had our adjusting to learning to live together and find a common ground and foundation early on. And with many people that I work with, especially in my counseling sessions, there are certain things that can disrupt a marriage. Of course, I've spoken about the lack of communication being one big part of it. Another, too, is marital issues when it comes to fertility. Many couples struggle with this. 1 in 6 couples, I believe, what I read, struggle with fertility issues, and sometimes it can become so emotionally and psychologically bearing on the couple that eventually they end up separating, or they have marital issues that they come seeking for counselors. And the reason why that is because I think part of society today, when you hear somebody getting married, first question is, well, how many kids do you want, or when are y'all going to have kids? So that's a lot of pressure on the married couple right away. And then for those that do struggle with it, they feel as though they may not be fulfilling what society wants from them. I know it's hard to say, let's not focus on what society wants. But you go to family functions, you go out with friends, you see children and people getting pregnant and having that just moment of joy of preparing for a child. And when you're having the fertility issues, it can feel a bit lonesome. And you go to these parties and you go to the baby showers and you put on the brave face to celebrate and you move on, and then you come back and you start to think, when is it going to be our turn? Should it be our turn? What's going on? And that's where we found ourselves pretty much 5 years into our marriage. We gave ourselves some time to settle down and adjust. And then we thought, okay, it's time to think of adding to the family. And we decided, okay, let's start. Let's try. And we'll leave it in God's hands. If he wants us to have children, then he will provide us with the children. But we're not going to stress over it right now. Especially at that time, we were trying to finish up our career, go back to school, go to college. So if it happened, it happened. That's how we looked at it. And then after a year, 2 years, it just wasn't happening. And we sat around and started talking. It's like, okay, Diosito, we gave it to you to put in your hands, but something's going on. Something's not right. So we decided, let's go get checked. Make sure we're healthy enough to have kids. And that, even to get to that conversation, took a while and a lot of talking about. Because, as I said, we had left it up to God's hands. As every married couple, newly married couple, you start thinking of your kids. What are they going to look like? What are we going to name them? What is the nursery going to look like? And Debbie loved Pinterest, and she always had boards going on. And a lot of the boards that she had was, of course, pictures of nurseries, what they would look like if we had a boy, if we had a girl, names. She had a list of names. I had a couple. We could never agree on one. But, of course, we compromised and we kind of whittled it down to at least a good couple of names that we wanted. And that's what we went forward with, and thinking that at some point we would
celebrate of having our own child. And when things weren't working out and things every month, it was always a disappointment. Even times when we thought, okay, this is it. We're going to be pregnant. And, the month passed and nothing. And that happened again, several months, several disappointments. We started thinking, okay, is this ever going to happen? And that's when we decided, okay, let's go check, make sure everything's working, make sure we're both fine. And I do want to stress, so anybody that is listening that is going through fertility issues or knows of anybody, let the guy know too that he needs to be checked. It's important because 50% of the time, it's usually the male that has the problem. So it's good to get checked. And that was one thing that we were told as well when we started looking into like the medical side of this. And so, of course, I had to go and do it. Most awkward moments of my life. But as Debbie said, you do nothing compared to what us females do at the OBGYN. So, suck it up, go get it done and get yourself checked. So we joked about it, laughed afterwards, and I'm like, how embarrassing, everybody knew what we were doing, going to these doctor's appointments, and she would just laugh at me when I would walk out because I'm not going to go into details, but you can imagine. So one of the first things that we did, of course, was to get physicals. So we went to our primary care physicians and to pretty much get the referrals because you do need referrals to get to the specialist. Did the whole head to toe check. Everything came out fine for me. Of course, minus my other medical issues like blood pressure. Debbie got hers. Of course, she had her stuff under control as well. And then we went off to the specialists to get checked again. And of course, those were the awkward moments for me, having to go to the urologist and then having to check. And things were fine with me. At that point, we, of course, then focused on Debbie and made sure that she was fine. And she did have some issues, but they weren't anything that would cause us to not be getting pregnant. So both of the specialists, mine and hers, gave us some medications, vitamins, and stuff to try to help us out. And we took those and we were followed for, I would say, a good 6 months to almost a year. And still nothing was working. Extra vitamins and medications weren't working. We got very frustrated, very irritated, again, heartbreak after heartbreak every month, thinking, okay, this is it, only to find that, again, we weren't getting pregnant. So we went back to the doctors, to the specialist, and they sent us on to some more tests, and Debbie kind of had to go through a lot more, and they sent us to another specialist. And this time, because we had tried the medications and the vitamins and all that for almost a year, they decided to talk to us about IVF. And we didn't quite understand the whole concept of it. I mean, we knew medically wise, briefly what it entailed. But they sent us to this one specialist where she was going to explain it in detail. This is what we do. This is how it works. And of course, this is how much it costs. So we kind of dragged our feet on that because we were thinking, we don't expect to get this far. We didn't think this was going to be the route we were going to go. But we said, you know what? Again, we'll put it in Diosito's hands. We'll go check it out. We don't have to make any decisions right now. Let's just go check out what this physician has to say. And we did, and it wasn't quite the physician office I would pictured. We walked into her office. She had this PowerPoint presentation. We sat on the sofa. She asked us these questions, and then she kind of went through detail by detail as to what they do for IVF. And we listened, and I nodded. We asked some questions, and of course, they showed us the cost of IVF, and of course, that big lump in her throat was like, oh my goodness. And it was still, even with IVF, not 100% certain that we would get pregnant right away. So we sat there, listened to the physician, asked her questions, and of course Debbie ran through all the questions that she had, and we left. And I don't think the decision was, it was well thought out when we got to the car. We sat in the vehicle, turned it on, and looked at each other and said, "Nope, this isn't the route." She said that she wasn't going to be a medical experiment. We weren't going to do this. It just didn't feel right. For us, it just didn't feel like the direction that we were going to want to go through. And again, we weren't going to spend thousands of dollars for a 50-50 chance that we may not get pregnant. We had already been trying before, so our chances were rather slim, at least to our thinking. So we decided, no, IVF isn't going to be the route we go. So at that point, we came back home and we talked some more and said, okay, we're not getting pregnant. Obviously, this isn't in the plan right now. Again, we prayed and put it back in God's hands. And it says, when you're ready for us to have children, we'll be ready. But we're not going to start focusing on it. It's not going to be our main priority in our marriage. We don't want it to ruin what we have just because we're not getting something we want. And that's pretty hard in a marriage too, because especially for us we've always been the ones to just, if we wanted, we wouldn't go out and get it. And this was one thing that we couldn't do at this time. So again, like I said, we put it back in God's hands and said, if you're ready for us to have children, then we'll be ready. Of course, months passed, years passed. We did decide then to focus on ourselves. Obviously the plan for us was not to have children at this time. So we focused on enjoying ourselves. We were able to live that marriage life with no children. So we could get up and go to vacations. We could, drop anything we were doing to go and enjoy ourselves somewhere. And that's what we did. We focused on building ourselves together, as well as also coming up with fulfilling some of the dreams that we had. I wanted to get my master's in counseling, so that's what I was able to do. Debbie wanted to go back and get her RN. She was able to do that because we didn't have anything really tying us down besides ourselves. And then we went on from there. Debbie wanted to get her BSN in nursing, and she wanted to do some more education. We said, well, go do it. There's nothing holding us back right now. So we both made the sacrifices for school. Sometimes I had to do double work. Sometimes she wasn't able to work, and we made it work for us. And I think that is what made our marriage even stronger, is that we supported each other. We were on the same idea, the same page of what we wanted out of life. And I do have to say that even though we were living this life of being childless and doing what we wanted and going on these great vacations, in the back of our minds, we always thought, wouldn't it be great to have a kid? And we would spend time with, our nieces and our nephews, and we'd spoil them, and we'd take them on trips with us. We'd take them here, get them this, get them whatever they want, and we kind of lived vicariously through them and through my brother and sister-in-laws as parents to these nephews and nieces. And, even one of our nephews, we were like his second parents. At least that's what he would tell people. So that's how we were living our lives. It was like, okay, we could go and celebrate the kids and be part of their lives. But at the end of the day, we would always just come back home. You go back to your parents and we continue our lives. But there was always, in the back of our minds and in the back of some of our many conversations, it would be nice to have one of our own. And when we would get into those moments, she would pull up the Pinterest boards. We'd talk about names again. We'd fantasize about what it would be like to have a son, a daughter. We wanted one of each. And we would move on after that. It was like, okay, let's focus on this. Let's get sad, dwell on this for a little bit, but then we're going to move on because it's not going to be the focus. It's just one thing that we're not able to have at this right now. And we lived most of our lives that way too. We would go, like I said, we would go to baby showers. We would see cousins have babies. We would have family members, friends, and we would celebrate and we would be joyful for them. But it always in the back of our head, it's like, when will it be our turn? And when things started to change, we sat around, and after several years of that, going back and forth, this isn't going to be what we want. We did just started talking about, what? It can't just be the two of us, and that was Debbie's big thing, was it can't just be the two of us. Yes, we love each other, but it just can't be us two. And that's when we first started talking about adoption. We talked about foster care. And early on, we would get real gung-ho. We'd look up stuff. We'd print out paperwork. We'd get all excited. And then, something would happen, whether it was in the family or just something didn't feel right, that we would just drop it and we would move on to whatever we were doing next. And that happened several times, and I remember Debbie getting upset sometimes, especially if I dropped it because we were doing something else. And she goes, it's like, here we are, we're excited, we're going to get started, and then it stops. And she would do the same thing. I wouldn't tell her that I would be upset, but we would just move on and just say, okay, it's us again. And again, that went on for several years. We'd still sit around, talk about kids, nicknames for the kids that we would have. And then, we'd talk about adoption again, or foster care. And again, it was just one big cycle, and we would always drop it because we were doing something new. We were doing something else. Another big adventure was coming up. Until, I would say, it was after COVID, I believe. Yeah, it was after COVID when the conversation came up again. She had her scare with COVID, and we decided, maybe it's time. We've spent enough time together. We love each other. We've had some great adventures, but it needs to be more than just us. And then we were invited to a cousin's, I think it was a birthday party. So we go to the party. The cousin had announced that they were fostering to adopt, and that they were getting a placement soon. They were going through the process. They weren't getting a placement, but they were going through the process. And of course, for Debbie, we were all excited for them because they were going to start this thing that we have always talked about. And so, of course, we started asking some questions. We wanted to know where they were going through, what type of agency they were working with. And of course, I was jotting stuff down on my phone. And I was like, okay, here we go. I don't know whether it was lightning strike or just whatever felt right. I was like, it's time. So we celebrated that night with them. We went home. That Monday, I went to work and then came home, and I looked up the agency and got some information. They were really quick to answer back. And I said, okay, it's like, I talked to Debbie, of course. I said, let's just see what they have to offer. There's nothing wrong with just asking questions, visiting with them, and let's just see what happens. I remember praying that night, saying, Diosito, here it goes again. It's in your hands. If this is what we're supposed to do, then it will happen. So we got the paperwork. We had the little visit over the computer with the agency. And very wonderful lady that we spoke with, very easy to speak with, explained a lot. And she goes, okay, so I can send you like the packets. Y'all can start filling them out. Just take your time and we'll get you situated. And what is it that y'all want to do? Do you want to foster to adopt? Do you want to adopt? Of course, we had tons of questions on that too. And she told us was everybody's best way to get a child or a baby, because we wanted a baby, was to do the foster to adopt. And of course, in that explanation, in foster care, to get a baby to adopt in foster care, you're looking at, years of waiting. You're on a waiting list. And we're like, okay, that's fine. We can, like, newborn to like 2 or 3, just enough time so where we could, raise them with our beliefs and stuff like that and our way of living. And we put it back out there and said, all right, just send us the paperwork. We'll fill it out. We'll just start the process. If this doesn't happen, if it falls through, then it falls through. It's not meant to be. So the agency sent the packet, I believe it was like the following day, if not that night. And my God, it was like 100 and something pages of just question after question. And not only did I have to answer the packet, but Debbie had her own packet to answer. So I remember printing mine up one day, and I sat down, and they're like, you can just type it on the computer, or you can write it out and send it in. And I was like, no, I'll type it. I'll sit here. I'll print Debbie's up. I'll sit at the computer, and for the next couple of nights, that's what I would do. Or while Debbie was working and I was home, after I got stuff done, I would sit down and answer some of these questions. And they wanted to know everything. They wanted to know, favorite color, everything you did, every relationship you had, how it ended, what caused the breakups, if you were ever married, which neither of us were, what caused the marriage to dissolve, have you drank alcohol, have you ever done drugs, have you ever been promiscuous, they wanted to know everything, and not only about us, but then they wanted to know about our parents and our siblings. So we had to list them out, and the questions of the upbringing, is like, what was life like in childhood? What was discipline like? Were you ever abused? Were you ever mistreated, malnourished, or all these questions? And you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's like, how do people answer these questions? And to me, as a counselor trying to answer the questions, of course, ours were very simple to answer with our upbringing, but this is talking about trauma. You're bringing up a bunch of trauma if you've experienced that while filling out these questionnaires. But in the understanding of, they want to know every detail about you before they drop off a child for you to care for. And of course, at that time too, Debbie was a little reluctant. I had to kind of say, hey, we got to get these questionnaires done. They're waiting for the answers. We only have a time limit to get these back, and I need you to sit down and do them. And of course she was like, well, she caused some conflict between us because she goes, no, now that you're all gung-ho about it, back then, you were dragging your feet as well. And I said, well, that doesn't matter from back then. This is right now. Please fill out this questionnaire. Of course, the whole time that she was doing this back and forth with me, she was filling out the questionnaire on her own. And then one night we were talking, and she goes, here, the questionnaire done. You can turn it in. And I did, and I said, all right. And it's like, here we go. It's like, once these questionnaires get turned in and the paperwork they're asking for, they'll determine whether we are even fit to do a foster to adopt. This wasn't even just to get the child. This was just to get him permission to be a foster parent. So I believe it was maybe 2 months, 3 months later, we hadn't heard anything. We're thinking, okay, maybe we didn't qualify. Maybe they found something. They would ask for certain papers, so we'd send stuff in, return back and forth, and we wouldn't hear anything for a while. And it was to the point where we're like, okay, I guess we're done. There's nothing else. They're going to call us at some point and tell us, I'm sorry, you can't be foster parents. And we started to get down a little bit, and I remember that, what was it? I believe it was early April of 23. I was at a meeting. It was during the middle of a Tuesday, and I was at a meeting, and my phone just kept ringing and buzzing, and I'm like, I'm not gonna answer it. We're in the middle of a meeting, and I never even looked at the phone until I left. And once I got back to my truck, it had the agency's name on it, and I was like, oh my goodness, I just missed a bunch of phone calls. They've been calling to me like crazy. So in the parking lot there, I called back and say, hey, I've just missed a bunch of phone calls. Just wondering to know what was going on because we hadn't heard from y'all. And they said, congratulations, y'all are been approved for foster parents. My colleague will be calling y'all either later tonight or tomorrow. What's a good time so we can get to the next step and move on from there. And of course, this was all going at one time, and I was like, I need to call Debbie. Like, this is exciting news. So I remember just saying, yes, tomorrow, after 4, give us a call. We'll be ready. And then I hung up with her, and I called Debbie quickly after that, and she was at work, and it took her a while to answer the phone. But I told her, it's like, we've just been approved for foster care. We have a meeting tomorrow at 4, we have to be there to talk to them. And we were excited. We were like, okay, here we go. Here starts the adventure. And from there, it was, we had a social worker come in. We had family services come in. We had to get her house prepared. They sent us a list and said, okay, you need this on for the house to be in safety conditions for a child. This is what you need for the child's room, clothes, Pampers, get your house ready so that when we have the inspection, it will be approved, So the next week or so, that's what we did. We prepared the house for a child. We did know who was coming. We did know what type of child we were going to have come to us. We kind of had an idea as to what we wanted, and we got the house ready. And then again, there was this big pause, and we're like, okay, we have the house ready. We have everything they want. We have everything checked. Social workers are coming. The family services come. We've met them. They've given us all these papers left and right and binders and things that we need to keep. And got all excited, and then we waited. And then they would come, and we'd wait again. And they'd call us, and they'd say, okay, things are good. We're just waiting now for a placement. And it was towards almost to the end of April. The year before, I had won a vacation package to Concan, which is like 20 miles from here. For a cabin for a weekend, and I had to use it, so I had booked it ahead for that weekend. And we were like, okay, it's like, we'll go on this last vacation. This will be our vacation. And then we're like, oh, we need to break it to our nephews and nieces, that are pretty much the family, that this is what we're doing. So we went and told her parents, and we told my parents that we were in this process of fostering to adopt, that we had been approved. And then we were like, okay, we need to break it to the nieces and nephews. And of course, especially the nephew, that he would say that he was our son and we were his second parents, because he was the one that said, you know what, Tia, I will take care of y'all when y'all get older. Y'all don't have to worry. Of course, we wouldn't do that to him, but we had to break it to him. So we took him on that last vacation with us to Concan and kind of broke it to him. And he was excited. I know he was excited, but he was a little, I guess, side-blinded by it. But he asked a lot of questions, and he's a lot like me and Debbie. So, he had 101 questions to ask, and a lot we didn't know. And we're like, we are just starting, but this is what we're planning on doing. And it was the Monday or the Tuesday of that week that we were going on vacation, we got the phone call, and they told us, hey, this is a social worker. We have a possible placement. I will send you all the information on the child. He's currently in another foster home. He is an infant. He's 6 months. Do y'all want to take him in? And of course, right away we were like, yes, of course. Yes, this is what we've been waiting for. And they said, well, Chloe, but first, before you finally decide, let us send you the paperwork, read over it about the child, the history, and then let us know, and we'll give you the information to the current foster mom, and she can reach out to you as well and give you more information on the child. So we're like, okay, let us look over the history and stuff. And of course, there was no need having to look over. We were like, yes, this feels right. It's a yes. So of course, the next day we called back and we said yes, and then they said, all right, I'll reach out to the foster mom right now, and she'll text you, give you a call here in a little bit. And she did, and we spoke to her, and she's a very lovely woman. We still do have contact with her. And she would tell us, it's like, you're getting a wonderful baby boy. He's a good child. He's all laughs and smiles and love. And she goes, and I will send you everything I have for him, because, I'll send, the car seat, the clothes, his toys, his jumping things, or his bouncing bed, everything I have for him, I'll send it to y'all, because it's his, and we were so thankful. And then she told us, if you want tomorrow, because it was already late at night when we spoke to her, she goes, he's already asleep right now, but if tomorrow you want to meet him, we can FaceTime, or we can get on the computer and kind of Zoom, and that way you can meet him. Of course, we said yes. Debbie was crying. I was crying. And we left it at that. That night, I think we cried. And we talked, and we were so excited. And, we told the family, like, we were getting a placement. And then the next day, we spoke to the foster mom. We got to meet him. And, of course, he was just that. He was all laughs and smiles. And, he was beautiful. And, of course, the foster mom there was like, say hi to mom and dad, say hi to mom and dad. And, of course, he was gooing and stuff. And we're like, that's our son. And then I guess the next day we're waiting. Okay, it's like, what's our next step? And the social worker called, and she goes, I'll call you in a couple of days. I'll let you know when we will officially take him over to you. So I'll give you a call in a day or so. So we were still getting ready to go on this trip. And we were saying, well, do we go? Do we not go? Because at any point they can come and say, hey, we're on our way with your foster son and you need to be home. And we waited and we decided, okay, if by Thursday night they don't call us that they're on their way, we'll go ahead and take off. We'll go on the trip and kind of just celebrate on our own with our nephew. And then we'll be, if they call, we'll just come back, simple as that. So we took off that Friday, spoke to the nephews, told him about what was going on. And we spoke to the foster mom again, another one of those nights. And then Sunday, as we were preparing to leave, we were packing up the truck and with all the stuff and getting ready to head back, is when the foster mom called and said, hey, I can be there tomorrow with the foster son, with your foster son. I will drop him off. I will be there majority of the day with you to go over paperwork, to help you out with whatever he settling him in, So we got back and called everybody again, and or at least the parents, and said, "Hey, he's coming Monday." And I remember we had gone to get the crib, so we were trying to put the crib up. My mother-in-law and my wife were trying to get the nursery ready and decorated and everything. And, we're trying to get everything settled because Monday was going to be the big day. And during this time, too, Debbie's sister and brother-in-law were on a trip I think it was out of town or out of state. So we didn't break it to them that all this was happening. And I'm surprised that it was kept a big secret until they got back, because everybody was so excited. And so that Monday came, and they brought him. Again, all laughs, all love. I don't think he ever once cried. And the strangest thing is that he looked like us. You would think that he was biologically ours. And the caseworker was here. They brought all the stuff. I unloaded the car with all the things that the other foster mom had brought him. And we went over some paperwork, signed some papers, and she goes, "All right, I'm taking off. If y'all have any questions, just call me, just phone call away." And she laughed. And me and Debbie looked at each other like, what do we do now? They just dropped off a baby with us, and now he's our responsibility. And I was like, what do we do? So the first thing, of course, we did was take pictures. Debbie holding him, I'm holding him, we're holding him together. And of course, he's just all laughs and giggles. And, it's like, okay, we need to change him, make sure he's fed. He's already taken a nap on the way over here. So he's had a good nap. And once we had time to adjust ourselves to the situation during the day, I think it was that evening is when we finally called the parents and said, "Hey, come meet, our son." And even for that to happen, even for them to come over to visit, there was a whole bunch of paperwork in that itself, because you can't just bring anybody over when you're fostering children. They have to be cleared, and if they're going to babysit, then they have to go background checks, and somebody has to be in the emergency, and those have to be background checked. So throughout the process, all our family basically was background checked at some point, so that they could come to the house and not only help us, but to just be here to visit with our son. So just that whole excitement, we were, parents. This is what we had been wanting. Granted, we were foster parents at that time, but this was what we had always hoped for, always wanted for us. Yes, it wasn't biologically ours, but like we said, we left it in Diosito's hands to bring us what he needed us to do. And that's what he did. So once we found out that, of course, we were getting a foster child, Debbie right away took maternity leave from work. Told them that, hey, we had told work what we were doing too. I mean, they had to fill out some paperwork as well. So they understood that once we were going to get placed, that Debbie would go on maternity leave. I would continue working, and then we would switch later on, as needed. So Debbie would stay home with him and it kind of worked for Debbie because she was almost done with school for the semester. So she was out like a month, or not even a month, maybe like a couple of weeks. And then she had the summer break from the school. So it worked for her, because she was still going to get paid because her contract was year round. But she was just on maternity leave now. And so she got to spend a lot of time with him early on and kind of keep him to his routine. The foster mom before us had him on this really great routine. So by 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, he was down for the night. And he would sleep with like nothing disturbing. He would fall asleep. It was like turning the battery off. And I was like, oh, that's Debbie in a nutshell. When she was tired, she would go to sleep and it was like switch off and she was out for the night. Sadly, he's not like that anymore. I wish he was, but that's partly to my doing. But he you know, fulfilled a lot of those dreams right away from that we had early on, and it felt right. And we were glad we did it. We were glad that, God allowed us to have him. And then before things started to get worse with Debbie, there was a lot of stuff we still had to do as foster parents. Because as foster parents, the child still belongs to the biological parent. So we had to do monthly or weekly visits with him and the biological mom. And that was an adjustment in itself, because a lot of what we were told didn't quite actually happen all the time. Like, we were never supposed to meet the biological mom. She was never supposed to know who we were, but things happen, and we did get to meet her. I do know who she is. And there's a lot of details that have helped by doing that. So I can't say that I don't think it was right, but I'm glad we had that opportunity, because I know a lot more about him and his background of where he comes from than I would had I not had a chance to talk to her or know her. And so we did that. We had to. It wasn't that we wanted to or we needed to. We had to do these weekly visits while we were doing the foster care. And again, that took time out of work. That took time out of our schedule to make sure that these are part of our responsibility as foster parents to provide him with that connection. And work also knew about that, and they worked well with us too. And then we were able to switch it up to going on the weekends, which helped even more, because then we were able to not miss work as much and still fulfill these responsibilities as foster parents. And in those months, we grew to love him even more, and he would start to babble more, and he was just growing. Like, every day always seems to be a new adventure. And parents that have, or people that have kids, you know how that goes. It's a blink of an eye and something's different. And we did that for, it was 6 months until Debbie got sick. And that was the first time we started to worry, because Debbie had been diagnosed. We were doing the hospital stuff. I was going back and forth because I still had to be here for him. We couldn't leave him. And we thought, okay, we need to inform the agency, family service, that this is the situation right now. And of course, our biggest fear was they're going to take him. We're sick. We're focusing on trying to get Debbie better. They're going to say, I'm sorry, we're going to have to place him somewhere else. And I remember making that phone call to the social worker, and I was expecting the worst. I said prayers before I called her, and I said, again, Diosito, we can't pray enough to you. You've given us a lot of blessings. And she goes, I explained the situation. I said, Debbie's been diagnosed with cancer. She's going to have to be going through chemo and treatments. And the only thing I remember her asking me was, so are you saying you don't want to be foster parents anymore? And I'm like, I kind of shocked me. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying this is what's going on, and I don't know how this affects our situation. And she goes, Paul, it's like people get sick all the time. If it is too much for you to care for him, then yes, just let us know. But if not, then we're not going to take him from you. People get sick all the time. And, this whole wave of relief just kind of came over, because that we had talked about that. It's like, no, if they're not going to take him, we're going to keep him. He's our son now. We were getting very possessive with him. And I was like, all right. I was like, okay, I just needed to let you know. And she goes, don't worry about it. If you need anything, if y'all need anything from us, Just let us know if you need respite care. Somebody can watch him while y'all do this and do that. And he goes, no, we'll work with you as y'all go through this and continue as the foster parents. So that was a big relief. And of course, we started getting more of the social workers coming through, and they would check on us. They would check on the house, and trying to do that and taking care of Debbie while she was sick and dealing with her treatments. Luckily, we are so blessed with a support system. Our parents, our siblings. We couldn't have done it without them. And things progressed. As I've talked in the other episodes, things got worse. And the second big scare of losing him again was calling and saying, hey, Debbie's passed away. What are my options now? Of course, in my head, I'm thinking, y'all are the foster parents. She's no longer there. And I know in just random thoughts that Texas, children stay with the mom. They don't usually go to the father. That's just part of the process. And I told her, it's like, what do I do? What's her next step now that Debbie has passed? Again, she goes, Paul, stop thinking like this. It's like, if you still want to be the foster parent and continue the process, then you have to continue the process. Just because she passed doesn't change your status. It just changes the paperwork. Like, she would be taken off, things, the responsibility stuff, and you would continue to be the primary caregiver. And there was no doubt that I was not going to continue. I was like, you can't take my baby away. You can't take our son. And again, they came in. We filled out some more paperwork. I turned some things in, like the death certificate and stuff. And they eventually removed a lot of her name and stuff from the paperwork and stuff like that. And that was a little painful to see that, because every month we'd have to go in and all our stuff was online with paperwork that we had to do, like monthly reports and medications and all this stuff. And to see all her stuff suddenly disappear off of the computer program kind of made it too real, I guess, that she was no longer part of that process. So I continued with, the foster to adopt. One of the things that did happen during Debbie's illness, and this was the month before she passed, was during the court sessions that we had. I think it was like every 3 months, a review, that they finally did take away the paternity rights to JoJo's mom, biological mom. So from that being done, Debbie was able to see that. Debbie was able to go through, at least view that court session. That meant that now we had another social worker that had to show up, and they were going to be the adoption social worker. So we were no longer going to have the foster parent social worker, which was very sad that we had to see her leave. And we ended up getting a new social worker. And her main purpose was to prepare us for the adoption. So Debbie was excited. Debbie got to know that we were going to adopt JoJo. But it was going to take some time, because the judge had to do some paperwork, and, there's all legalities behind it. And we were like, okay, we're going to get to adopt him. Debbie will get to see him. We'll get to go through the ceremony together. And of course, paperwork takes forever to get done. And Debbie ended up passing before we finally got to adopt him. And I adopted him in July of after she passed. So at least 6 months after she passed, he became ours. By then, he was walking and laughing and running a mile a minute. I mean, he was still all joy, all love, all laughs, looking more and more like both of us, especially with Debbie's attitude. And he officially became our son. Of course, the day of the adoption, the whole family was there. I think we filled up the courtroom, which I don't think we were supposed to, but we did. And everybody took pictures, and at the end of it, I'm holding him with the judge, and the whole family's behind us, celebrating him becoming part of the family. And it's been a blessing ever since. And I always said, he came to us at the right time. We were needing him at this moment where we were at our lowest, and he was able to get us through our hard time. And granted, he didn't know what was going on. He didn't understand. But we knew that at the end of the day, after all the struggles, after all the treatments, his laugh, his smile, his hugs made it all better. And now he's 2.5, going on 3. And some days I sit and worry and cry and get upset that Debbie isn't here to see all of this. She would have loved him. I'm sorry, I knew I was going to get emotional. But he's been pure joy. He's been the blessing. I believe in my heart that God sent him to help me, to help us get through losing Debbie. And he acts so much like her. It's scary sometimes because he'll look at me and I'm like, oh, that's so your mother. And and we laugh and he'll laugh, and but he has just been pure joy and a blessing, like I said, that we were able to go through this process and him be able to be part of our family. One question that I would get and questioned all the time, while we were going through this process was like, will you tell him eventually at some point that he was adopted? And we were like, yes, we're not going to keep that from him. We will share what we need to share, let him know what he does. What that information is up to him, but we're not going to keep it a secret from him. We'll let him know what happened to his mom, Debbie, and anything he wants to know about her, I will share that. I think now that he's 2.5 and he knows more and he does more and he's trying to be so independent, I ended up buying a book that I saw on Facebook, and it was called Letters to My Son, and that's what it says on the title, and then of course it has his name. And that's what I do sometimes. I'll sit at night, especially big occasions, first birthday, second birthday, Christmas, anytime he's had some big event, I would sit down at night and I would write him a letter telling him how wonderful he is and this is what happened. And I wrote in there about Debbie and I wrote about the adoption, and at some day I will give it to him, whether it's the day, his 18th birthday, the day I tell him that he was adopted, or I just wait and leave it for him for when the time is right. He'll get that book, and it hopefully will explain a lot, and it's also a good way to document the process we went through and everything he means to us. But one thing that I wasn't expecting, which hit hard the other day too, like I said, he's talking, and we'll go to the cemetery, we'll go visit the grave, we talk about Mama, we pray for Mama, so he's aware that she's not here. He's aware that she's passed. But he's never really said anything emotionally or anything to say, hey, I know what's going on. But the other day, it hit hard because we were sitting here in the living room. It was just me and him. He was watching TV, or we were watching TV after supper, before bath. And he got up and he went over to the picture of me and Debbie. I think it was our engagement picture that I have on one of the end tables. And he was just talking and talking to her. I couldn't hear what he was saying. He was just kind of mumbling under his breath, like whispering. And then he gave her a kiss. And then he brought the picture over to me. He told, give her a kiss. Give mom a kiss. And I did. And he said, I miss her. That was the first time that he's ever said that or has ever mentioned anything like that. And I was, stomach punched. I don't know. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I think I broke down crying. Of course, he looked at me like, what just happened? And I think I gave him a big hug and just told him I loved him. And I said, yes, I miss her too. And then we talked about her for a little bit. I shared a story or two about her and him. And then he went and he put the picture back and he went back to watching TV like nothing just happened. And there I am sitting on the couch, like ugly crying and trying to say, well, what just happened, But that was the one time he's actually said stuff. There's been other times where, especially when he was younger, that he'd be in the room talking and I'm like, who is he talking to? And, he'd be like, mama, and I'm like, okay, hi, mama, just playing along with him. But that was the first time that he's actually mentioned anything emotional about her. And of course, for Christmas, I made picture books of pictures of him and her that he could take with him to daycare, just in case he's ever got emotional there about her, that they could pull it out and say, hey, let's talk about mama. Let's look at mama's pictures. And he will do that too, when we're sitting down and I notice he gets real sentimental, like something's going on. And he'll ask, let's look at pictures on the phone. And usually the pictures tend to be that of Debbie and him or us. And of course he laughs and he smiles and he talks about her and says mama. And, but those are the times that are really hard for me now when he's doing that. And now that he's starting to speak more and talk more about emotions and things like that, that I know I'm going to have to prepare myself for those harder questions that I know eventually will come from him in asking, what happened? Why isn't mama coming home? Where is she at? And I know I have support with my in-laws, my parents, and all the family to help me with those times. But I am still trying to prepare myself for those answers too, so that I can answer them without crying. I don't want to freak him out or make him feel even more emotional. So I have to kind of get myself together. And of course, this is why I'm doing this, is to prepare myself for those hard questions that I will have to answer for him. But yeah, that's our last adventure and how we got our son. He is our adopted son. God placed him with us. As we said, we left everything in his hands and he answered as always when he's ready. So that's the best way I can explain him, is that he's our blessing from God. And of course, we nicknamed him JoJo, but his real name does relate back to this whole process. And that's what makes it even more wonderful. So yeah, so that's this month's episode. It's probably a little bit more emotional for me to have talked this through, but it's one that I am grateful to have had with Debbie and to have her son to help me get through all of this grief as well. So we'll see you next month.
Again, thank you for listening to 46 and Widow, Life, Love, and Family. I'm your host, Mr. Paul. You can catch my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and on YouTube. Also, don't forget to follow me on Facebook at 46 and Widowed, Life, Love, and Family. On Instagram, 46 and Widowed. and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at 46 and Widowed. You can find the links in the bio. Leave a message, comment, something that you would like me to cover, or if I have more information on. And again, thank you for listening, and God bless.